Welcome to the Entrepreneurial CEO Podcast, where we dive into the real stories behind building and scaling a business. Each episode, we sit down with CEOs, founders, and leaders to uncover hard-won lessons in leadership, systems, and team building. Listen in each week to learn directly from real business leaders who have been in your shoes, had success, made the mistakes, and all of the messiness that comes with building a business. If you're ready to learn from real-world leaders and gain insights you can apply today, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Steve Behunin. Steve is a former senior consultant with MAP, and someone who played a pivotal role in the really incredible transformation in the home services space. Steve was the lead senior consultant working with Ken Goodrich and the Goettl team during explosive growth, including the execution of the incredible 1,000-day plan that helped position Goettl for a $500 million private equity exit. If you guys were listening last week, Ken was on the show and talked about that in depth. And Steve's work here helped install the structure, the discipline, and the leadership systems that allowed the company to scale at speed without losing control. So today we're going to ask Steve a ton of questions about that 1,000-day plan and working with Goettl and about that transformation. So Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. So can you briefly touch upon or describe Goettl, like their size, the services, the history, and the challenges they were facing when they initially came to MAP?
Sure. So I'm not sure of the exact date, but I met Ken, like many other CEOs, sitting in my Wednesday morning workshop, our executive leadership workshop, with 15 other executives. And we took him through the 3-day process where we shared the MAP management system, which is you need to measure vital factors. You need to set goals with your direct reports. You need to then hold them accountable to that every 30 days. And after 3 days of this experience, Ken approached me just about the time that all of the participants exit Friday at 12 and said, I want you to come and work with my team. So we worked out an arrangement where he had acquired the Goettl company, 75-year, very rich history of the Goettl brothers in the area of Phoenix, whereas, you know, is probably one of the hottest environments during the dog days of summer. And these guys created U.S. patents for evaporative cooler systems. And then they grew that along the way and got into air conditioning once Freon and all of that was introduced. And Ken acquired this company with this rich history, strong brand, the Goettl company in Phoenix. Said, I want you to meet with my existing team and introduce the MAP management system. So I flew to Phoenix and we kicked that off as we always do in a 4-hour meeting with all of Ken's direct reports, introduced them to MAP and what MAP's all about, created vital factors, the key measurements, the metrics that define results that are measurable, I mean, whether or not you're achieving your goals or not. And of course, the biggest question MAP always asks is, well, what are we going to do if we're not? And the key to all of this was Ken's leadership, quite frankly. One of the sayings we had at MAP is that when it all comes down to it, at the end of the day, we ask that question about the leader. It's the leader. It's always the leader in whatever occurs. So Ken had high expectations, held his people accountable, was disciplined, and then the key is, of course, follow up. And follow up with patting on the back when they do well, and what is our corrective action? What will we do differently if we didn't achieve what we expected? So we began that process. A part of that was also creating a plan. You mentioned a 1,000-day plan. Ken had great dreams and visions of expansion, and he did this in a couple of ways. Implementing our system was the first, again, Chapter 8 in Ken's book, The E-Myth for HVAC contractors, and talked all about the system, got that in place, got the right people in the positions for his organization in all of the departments, sales, operations, accounting, customer service, and then went down the path and we implemented and executed on his plan, which included expansion to other areas. So it was then Tucson, got maptized, as we call it. Then Ken started a greenfield in Las Vegas with 0 customers and 0 revenue. And we started the map process with a general manager who hired his top people in all those departments I mentioned, and grew the Las Vegas facility in an unbelievable way over a few years with the right people in the positions, from 0 to when I left there a couple of years ago, they were in the $35 to $45 million range annually. Of course, then he added California and added Texas, where I had the opportunity to implement all of the MAP meetings at all of these locations. And then this followed the plan, Ken's plan and his team's plan. So when I met him, he was a $12 million company, total $12 million in Phoenix. Within 5 years, he grew the company to over $180 million in top line sales. And of course, if you know anything about growing the top line while managing the middle, which is the expenses, the bottom, which is profit, exponentially grows. And that did for Ken, which appealed, as you mentioned, to some private equity firms who saw this growth and the high percentage and dollars of net income. And so he had a couple of very successful experiences with that. Ken was also a unique leader because Ken believed in sharing his success with others. You know, you meet some leaders who just want to keep closed books, don't share anything about my success. Not Ken. He completely opened his kimono, as some would call it, and he would speak at large contractor or home service events, wrote the book about HVAC contractors. So he shared this with others. And along the way, many other organizations and service businesses attended MAP and wanted to follow that same process that Ken did. And so, as you mentioned, there are, and still probably to this day, several CEOs who say, I want to do what Ken did, because he shares Absolutely. It openly, which to me is, it's a very healthy approach. Share your success and others will also grow from that. And not everybody made it. And the key was, I asked myself this every time. We would have some of these companies that, would be $1 million or 10 million, and they weren't experiencing the growth. And others were, just like Ken. And I said, the key to this was leadership. What I found was the leaders that were unable to achieve the kind of growth, even smaller if that's what their goals were, but at some point of exponential growth, it was about they were unwilling to be the disciplined leader that assured they had the right people in the right positions, not the best, the right person, that they were also accountable, set goals based on measurements that were defined as measurements of success for business, and followed up on that. And the key again was that these leaders just were not willing to take that final step to be the leader to drive accountability. And that's what I found in this experience. So, of course, I handed off Goettl to Ryan, who took over when I retired a couple of years ago. And so in my career, I would have to say there are probably 3 to 5 companies, I only need one hand to count them, that had this kind of exponential growth. And when I backed up and looked at the bigger picture, the key was leadership, accountability, discipline, follow-up, and out of that comes achievement consistently. That's the point about us doing our meetings monthly and annual planning meetings. Don't ever back off on that. Don't reschedule a meeting because we're busy.
Yep.
Make it the
Yep.
most important meeting of the month. And
It's
when companies and leaders do that, they'll experience success.
it's a pretty incredible story. The growth
It
within
is.
that 5-year span, it's incredible. If you can recall, were there any big risks or opportunities that stood out when you started working with them? Things that had to be addressed?
Well, it was clearly Ken and I on several occasions would have that discussion about, I've got, let's just say Bob Smith, making up a name, in this region, and I really need the leadership, but I'm not seeing what I need, what I expect to see.
Hmm.
And Ken believed in, uh, he believed in hire slow, and then the opposite of that, fire quick. And my point is, uh, have clear expectations, hold people accountable, see the behaviors early on, and make the hard call and get the right person in the role. And I could go through all of these locations I mentioned: Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, California, San Antonio, and show you key examples of when he got the right person in there to lead the team. And of course, with Ken leading the overall team, that's when the success was experienced.
Okay, so it came down to people. I mean, yeah, mostly people. Were there any other challenges that Ken and the team were facing at the time, from maybe leadership or execution or operations? Or is it all just about getting the right people in the right seats?
Well, it was the leadership, getting the right people in the right seats. And then you've always got the top leader, and that was Ken. Then he had the general managers in all the locations. Each of those had their department heads. So they too had to be strong leaders, the department heads, and drive accountability to support the overall goals of the company, and continually communicating that in the monthly reviews of where are we with these results? What are we going to do differently to assure we get back on track?
Mm. Can you walk us through the structure of the MAP engagement? Like when Ken first started when you first started working with Ken and the Goettl team, what are their first few months like? How did they start getting traction? You mentioned within the different divisions, departments, the executive team.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, the MAP guy, that's me or Ryan, the MAP senior consultant / executive coach, shows up. In advance, we send an email to all the members of the team. And prior to that, of course, we talk to the CEO, Ken in this case. Who are your department heads and what departments are they in? We create an org structure. We send an email saying this will be our agenda. So every successful meeting has an agenda, a timeline, and we follow that process religiously with discipline. And that rolls down into the team. And most teams aren't comfortable with that at first. So the process starts a little slowly. We introduce in the first meeting the team to the MAP management system, which I mentioned earlier consists of 3 elements: determining your vital factors, which are key metrics, important measurements that identify the measurable success of the key areas. And of course, we use the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. We don't want to measure everything in your business, just the top 20% that drive the overall success and results. So items like revenue, that can be broken down into residential and commercial. Items like expenses, they come from a lot of different areas. Items like net income or EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And we dig into identifying these numbers and create a spreadsheet for the organization, work with the top finance guy on the team. Then we also find out what each department head is responsible for. They explain their areas, and then from there, we share with them how to set good MAP goals. So MAP goals are measurable, something that they can control in their area. So a sales manager might have revenue or number of calls made per month, how many closes, close rate for sales manager. The operations manager is going to be things like I might have this many openings in my department. I've got to put this much in my head count. Might be overall expenses. Just some examples there. In Ken's case, we had it wasn't residential and commercial, it was plumbing and HVAC. And we would have department heads from each of those areas who were responsible for their vital factors. And of course, an important piece of that is customer satisfaction. And we would measure that by return customers, complaints, and that the things you measure improve. That was another theme of MAP. What gets measured improves. And what gets measured and reported on improves quicker and better. And that, of course, supports the MAP management system, which then I was talking about goals. And by the way, there's one other point I didn't mention. A powerful tool that we teach organizations is called team consulting. So we teach a disciplined process. It's time-bound, where you identify a problem in a given department. How do we reduce complaints? And that's what you do. You put it into how do we, or how do I, or how to questions. And then you go through in a disciplined fashion and ask for input from each of the department heads. And you get input from the CFO or the person in operations, not just the customer service department. And then we agree as a team of these, which are we going to implement? And we assign that to, let's just say in this case, the customer service manager. So those are some examples of how we introduce that. And then at the very end of the meeting, we set dates for the remainder of the year. 12 months. We put it on everybody's calendar, the MAP guy, all the department heads, and the CEO. And a good leader says, plan your year around these meetings. I expect you to be in attendance at each of these meetings and be ready to answer about your department and your vital factor achievement. So they had it. No excuses. Plan your vacations around this, your kids' graduations, all of that. It's important. Now, there's some exception, but not very often. You need your people who are responsible to be present and accountable. And that's what we introduced. So then the next month, I would show up, always 15 minutes before the meeting starts to get prepared. People would arrive. Nobody was late. At MAP, it's all about time management. You have to value each other's time. So we instilled some discipline in the organization too. And here's the other outcome that was really interesting about this. And I experienced this in my 20 years. Certainly you can ask any other senior consultant, but your top performers couldn't wait to get to the MAP meeting every month because they were going to give you good news about what they accomplished. And we talked about the good news. Now, the ones that didn't like the meetings were the ones that didn't achieve their goals. They knew that they had to report out on their goal achievement or not each month, and they would be held accountable. And accountability isn't an attack on a person. We attack the problem. That's MAP's golden rule. This isn't a personal thing, but how did your department do? And if that leader has bad news, they're not alone. The whole team can come in with some team consulting ideas on how to assure that they achieve those goals the next time. And that goes on every month, every year. In October, every year, my clients and I would sit down and plan the entire next year. So we would start with January through December, each October. And then we had it in place, honestly, for the next 14 months. We would do it every year. Discipline. And we'd plan on our calendars, when is our all-day planning session? The example you gave was Ken's 1,000-day plan.
Yeah. Was there any pushback from the team, from the Goettl team, or bumps in the road? How do you ensure buy-in? Ken was obviously bought in, but his team has to buy in too, right?
That's a great question, because in Ken's first meeting, and by the way, the way it shows up is, or the way it starts is the MAP guy shows up and you meet in some conference room, or in Ken's case, it was a training room where you just pull some tables together in a horseshoe shape, which, by the way, Ken always wanted his meetings in a horseshoe shape. He'd come in and move tables himself if people were lined up in a classroom setting. He did that because we all had to look at each other eye to eye and answer up to your department. But yes, there was some pushback. I can remember the very first few meetings. Here's what Ken saw, and I. There were probably more people in that meeting than needed to be. Some of the people in that meeting had long histories of knowing each other, friends, in some cases, family. Makes it really tough. And we realized early on that, first off, we're a little top heavy here, which is more expense, less on profit. And we had some of the wrong people in the room and in the positions. So immediately accountability started. People, here's how it goes too, by the way. Ken will share this with you. Some of those people went to Ken and said, hey, why are we having these meetings? Things were really comfortable around here. We were a $12 million company. We didn't meet very often. We just go out and we were really busy. The question is, are you busy doing the right things to get the right results? And Ken, of course, as you mentioned, supported the system. So not everybody made it. So in the early stages, some people would voluntarily opt out. This isn't for me. Maybe I'll take a lesser position in the company. Or in some cases, it was determined that we really didn't need somebody in that position, whatever it was. And that was, too many costs, unnecessary costs.
Hi, if you're a CEO out there who's struggling with focus for your company, aligning your team, accountability, if you're struggling with execution, connecting the dots from where you're at to where you want to be, we've got a great program for you here at MAP. My name is Michael Cato. I'm the CEO. Most importantly, I was a client for 15 years, sold my company to a public company, and then bought MAP so that we can help other entrepreneurs with this specific problem. We're a 60-year-old company. We've worked with 170,000 individual executives and CEOs. We've worked with 15,000 organizations. This is what we do. Click the link below to learn a little bit more about how people just like you, CEOs, have transformed their business and ultimately transformed their life by running through the MAP system.
So
that's really interesting. They sort of self-select out because they don't want to be held accountable, some people, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned the 1,000-day plan. And again, we talked about it with Ken. It's amazing. Maybe just what was the 1,000-day plan? How did it come together? And what role did MAP play in the execution?
Sure. Well, the first thing is an organization in our planning process, some of the first, let's call it pages of a multi-page document starts with the history of the organization, which was very rich, and the strong Goettl brand, as I mentioned earlier. Secondly, a company and their team decides together, what is your vision for the company? What's your mission? What is your purpose for what you do and why you do it every day? That's the mission. And what values do you operate your organization with? So we'd spend some time on that. Then we started talking about what is our vision and goals. So if we're a $12 million company and we want to get to 24 million in the next 12 months, that's documented. And then we determine how we're going to get there. And so it's really what's the goal? How are we going to get there? Then everyone on the team is determining these are some of the strategies and tactics we need to implement and execute on over the next 12 months to get to our goal of 24 million on the top line. And we would then ask, that was the how. Then we say, okay, well, who's going to own this? So the sales manager would own, say, growth in revenue or number of customers or number of units sold. The person in operations might own, I need to get a larger warehouse, and I need to identify a lower cost supplier for, in Ken's case, our air conditioning units and all of the parts and pieces, materials and equipment that go along with that. So those are just some examples, and we would document this. How are we going to get to there? Who's going to do it? And then the most important thing is, when are you going to do it? Then we would combine all of this information. And by the way, I guess I got a little ahead of myself. We'd go through, what are our challenges? What are our strengths as a company? And what are our weaknesses or failures? What are we going to do in this next year to assure in this next 12 months that we improve on those failures and weaknesses to strengthen our successes? We also evaluate the market. So the HVAC market or the plumbing market. Who are our competitors? What are we going to do to assure that we're ahead of our competitors? And all of this comes down to, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? That's the key. Again, I mentioned those are the department heads. And when are they going to do it? So a timeline. Now, that timeline, we would look at the big picture, 12 months, and spread it out. You can't do it all at once. What are our vital few each month that we're going to accomplish? And we would put those dates down. And by the way, those dates were the MAP meeting dates. So when I would show up every month, whatever that date was, these were goals that these individuals had to accomplish. And then we would review the plan and say, well, Bill, Bob, Sally, or Sue, did you achieve what you committed to on the plan here? And we put that in what we call a one-page plan. So we took all of this information, put it on one page, and then the map guy shows up with this one-page plan in a large a wall-type flip chart size, or whether it might be a Zoom meeting. We would bring it up on the screen and review everything that needed to be accomplished that we committed to 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and we're now here in June or August. Did you get that done? And then we look forward to, okay, what's due in September, the next 30 days? Don't forget, Bill, Bob, Sally, or Sue, you committed that we were going to identify a new location in Las Vegas. Somebody was going to identify a building, lease the building, get all of the equipment in place. These are the kind of things, and that's how we lived the plan. Now, we didn't always achieve that. So let's say in September, we didn't accomplish what we said. Well, we would team consult. What do we need to do to make sure we get that done by October? Or maybe there's a more realistic date of November. But we would communicate about that and discipline. We would meet every month to discuss that.
So that's a super important process, that planning. And I've as a former MAP client, I've been through many of those planning sessions myself. I always loved them because I thought they just set us up for a good year or a good quarter. And so Goettl had that in place for their annual. And then so essentially they followed the same plan for when they put together this 1,000-day plan. It was the same process, the same structure.
That's a great question. The 1,000-day plan falls into what we at MAP call the long-term plan. That's a little bit bigger picture. So that 1,000-day plan, could have been 120 million. But we would break it into annual bites, and that's what we would do in our annual planning. We then meet, when we meet in our annual planning session, we would look at the long-term plan, the 1,000-day plan, and say, where are we on all of these commitments that we made, which would align with the annual plan, and then break them into 12-month pieces to get accomplished, asking those same questions. What is it we're going to do? Who's going to do it? How are we going to do it? And when? With due dates.
So it's really just backing into the long-term vision. If you want to get to 50, you need to be at 25 by X time. You need to be at 10 by Y time. And it's really just backing into it and figuring out, methodically how you're going to get there.
Right. Exactly.
When you think about they obviously were going through some crazy growth. When you think about the growth phase and the time during the 1,000-day plan, were there any particular components, systems, or habits that were the biggest difference? Like, was it the vital factor process? Was it the meeting cadence? Was it training all the leaders? Like, is there anything that stands out?
Well, certainly the first step is the leader. After that, it's identifying a system. By the way, there are other systems out there that some organizations are using. The key is defining those key metrics, assigning ownership to those in the format of goals, putting a timeline on that, then following up and reinforcing on was it achieved or not. Of course, you mentioned training, and before training comes staffing. Staffing is a key point. I mentioned getting the right people in the right positions and not settling for the best. That means I've got an opening in a given department and I see 3 individuals and I select the best of the 3, but it's not the right person. The key is leaving that open. Then once you get the right person for the role, by the way, if you hire the best versus the right, you're going to regret it. And many leaders will say, if you need people bad and you do it quickly, you're going to hire bad people. You don't want the wrong person, because that's a headache that just goes on and on and on of constant follow-up. Get the right person, you're just praising their successes and letting them go out there and continue to be successful. And training is a key point. Ken mastered training. In Ken's locations, well, they built Goettl University under Rick's leadership. That was an amazing model that they did. So then they would just duplicate that because they were constantly hiring. Recruiting is never over for any leader. Always be recruiting for the right person, for the A player, and get them in there and train them correctly, which there was the Goettl way to do things. Ken had a famous story. He might have shared this with you about the red screws.
Mm-hmm. No.
That's detailed. Ken had this thing about when my service tech got there, wherever it was, looking at an air conditioning system. If anybody looks at their air conditioner, you see that there's a whole lot of sheet metal and screws that hold it together. A lot of times over years, the screws will pop out or become loose. Most companies will just go repair whatever it might be, a condenser, this or that, do some new wiring, but they never replace the screws. Ken got right into the detail. And that was what was different about Goettl. He purchased red screws. And when they would go replace screws, and that was one of the service tech's responsibility, they were red screws. And it showed the quality that they delivered. So that was part of their training. Just some key things that differentiated them from other organizations. So, yeah, staffing, training, creating your vital factors, setting goals, team consulting, which is a group problem-solving process, and then implementation and execution, and then follow up and reinforce, and assure that you're holding people accountable.
When you think back to the time, when you first started working with Goettl towards the end, through that journey, can you recall any moments that were like breakthroughs when you see that the team is starting, what do they say? It's storming, norming, performing. Are there any moments that you can think of when they started to really shift how they operated or worked together as a team?
I'd probably say early on in the Phoenix days when we began there, it was when just following the MAP process, the first phase is mechanics. So people understand, okay, I get vital factors, I get goals, I know what team consulting is, I know what my role is. Then they get into a phase where they embrace this and they internalize it. And that typically might take, the mechanics phase is 6 months. That next phase could be 12 to 18 months before the team says, okay, I'm showing up every month, I'm reporting out on my goals, I'm delivering well, I'm being praised for my success, or I have to answer the tougher question, which is, what's your corrective action? And how am I going to turn this around? So I'd say probably, there's an aha moment in the 12 to 18 month phase that people get it. The lights come on.
Mm.
When they completely embrace it is when you can even let go and allow them to implement the meetings, to execute the meetings, and watch them hold people accountable. Because that's really what the MAP person does. We introduce a system and a process, and then we come in and play the role of the bad guy, asking the tough questions every month. And some CEOs want us there every month, every year. And there are examples, of course, at MAP that you have some 30-year clients, some that I've had an opportunity to work with, because they appreciate and value that assistance each month for a coach to come in and you could say crack the whip. I mean, we're really there to create a positive environment of team success, but along the way, we help ask the tougher questions. Tough question.
So I'm going to maybe depart from the Goettl questions. I'm curious, if there's a CEO listening and he's like, well, why don't I just do this myself? What would you say? Like, what is the value of working with a Steve Behunin or another amazing MAP senior consultant versus just trying to do it yourself?
Well, we're all human beings, and many times we want to forgive. I'll forgive that department head for not achieving goals. They're working hard. I see they're working hard. I know what they're dealing with at home. Just like a personal trainer, do we want someone to come in and help us stay focused on what is vital in our business, or do we want to attempt to take that on ourselves? It takes a true leader to look inward and say, this is not my expertise. For those who have a personal trainer, we know how easily we can let ourselves off the hook. Because, I've got a lot to do. Maybe I just won't hit that alarm at 4 a.m. to go out and do 3 miles, to go into the weight room. But when that person realizes, I need somebody to be a coach, to hold me accountable, improvement occurs, success occurs, results improve. And that's really what the role of the MAP senior consultant is. So my experience is 30 years in business, which I then brought to MAP for 20. It's the CEO that can step up, look in the mirror and say, I could use some help in this area. So I'm bringing in a coach. And that's what MAP's all about.
It's the humility, having the humility to know that you could use the help. Let's talk results. So from the time MAP got involved to the time Goettl exited, what metrics improved? Can you share, or do you recall any hard numbers about either the growth? Obviously, we know the revenue growth. It's amazing. From 12 to, I think you said 200 or somewhere around there.
Heard 200. It was about 180.
Wow.
And I left a couple of years ago. Yeah.
I mean, retention, accountability, profitability. Can you share anything about the results that were achieved?
As I mentioned, probably the number one measurement that organizations focus on, that CEOs focus on, that shareholders focus on, that the banker focuses on is profit. And you can measure that in a few ways. You can call it net income before taxes, after tax, however you want to measure that. But it's what's left after what you sell or deliver in a service that you charge a dollar amount for, what you spend to sell that in expenses, whether it's fixed or variable expenses, and then what's left. And that's the key, is profit. So that was the outcome of Ken's success and results. The other thing is, when you grow the revenue, the top line, the growth on the bottom gets exponential. You find your sweet spot. You find, let's just say one branch, Las Vegas, who was 0, went to 35 or 40 million in the time I worked with them. Just 5 years. Started with 0. I mean, we met it. We weren't counting revenue because we didn't have any. but we had to determine how we were going to get there. And then to wind up with 35 to 40 million on the top line, what happens is what's left, the net income, you find that sweet spot and the net income grows at a higher percentage, which equals a lot more dollars, which appealed to private equity firms who courted Ken quite a bit. They just couldn't figure out how is it that you were successful here. And so that was the key. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, look, obviously their revenue growth is amazing and the profitability. What about culturally? What about, inside the company? How did people respond as the map management system was integrated and all these processes started to change?
Great question. The companies that really master map, I can think of several, Ken's being one, Goettl, is when map cascades throughout the organization. So you've got the CEO and their executive team, probably C levels or vice president levels. It varies. $1 million company, it's not going to be that. Then it goes to the next level. And even right down to the person that's sitting at your reception desk when people walk through the door of your business. We call them the director of first impressions. Very important role. Has goals every month. So when MAP truly cascades through the organization, you become a term that we call maptized. And that's when the whole culture of the organization, you mentioned culture, really embraces this, that every role has something that's measurable. I can think of the example of a CEO that grew a very specialized delivery company that we worked with, who was having financial troubles in the business, almost lost the business. And then, and by the way, this specialized delivery company was purchased once he maptized it, because he said that if there's somebody on our payroll that we can't measure at least 2 or 3 results each month about their accomplishments, we don't need that position. And as a result of this, they were completely maptized, culture throughout the organization. This guy sold his business to a small little company that drives brown trucks around and delivers packages. And at one point in this guy's career, he was the largest shareholder of that company's stock. And that was what the success of maptizing your business all the way to the front line, that the culture embraces, that everybody is measurable for something. We praise them when they achieve and exceed that something, and we ask for corrective action when they don't. And then that's implemented, followed up, and reinforced. I know I've been using a lot of the same words, and that's because it sounds simple. It's basic. These are fundamentals, just like blocking and tackling and passing in football. But when we execute on those fundamentals and do that well, that's when success occurs. And the key, I mentioned football, okay? The key to that is the coach, the leader, and think back. All of us have had coaches at one point or another in some sport. It was the tough coach, the one that held me accountable, that drove me to be disciplined, to achieve above what I could believe I could achieve. That was the tough one, and ask the tough questions. And again, that's what MAP coaches are about.
Yeah, whenever I'm explaining MAP to somebody, I often use blocking and tackling because it really is. It's simple, but it's the process and the execution of it, the consistency that's important. If another CEO, maybe somebody that aspires to have the success that Ken and Goettl had, is listening and considering MAP and looking to grow, what would you want them to understand about what makes the MAP system work when it's done right?
That it starts with me, the leader, that I need to be committed. And some of that means that I'm going to have to make a change. So I might have to get out of my comfort zone. And then I need to support that change and discipline and accountability with my team. So it's like, is that person the one that says, I'm just not comfortable with the way I'm feeling these days, so I probably could get a little gym time in. And when I do that, am I going to ask somebody for their assistance because they're an expert in that? And we're experts in business and systems and accountability. That's what I bring.
I like that. I like that analogy.
CEO experience.
When you think about your time with Goettl, what's the biggest thing you learned working with them through this transformation up until the amazing exit to private equity?
Yeah. I learned a lot about, or my takeaway was Ken Goodrich was a strong leader who, once he embraced the system and was driving that discipline and accountability, was the key. Also, that leader can hire slow, get the right person in my general manager roles that you throughout the nation, and then empower them and delegate to them my expectations. And not everybody made it. So that's the other half of fire quick. We know, most CEOs know quickly. We say, well, legally, I think it's 90 days somebody has in their new role, where you can be an at-will employer and let them go for any reason. We say, not within 90 days or 60 or 30, you probably know within 9 days if that's the right person. And we feel it right here in our gut. Now, some leaders will implement what's called the hope strategy. And you're feeling that right here. I hope they get it. I hope that new division head gets it. Now, it's been 30 days. I'm just not seeing much going on in that division. Have I been clear with them? You're starting to implement the hope strategy. You feel it right here, kind of in your solar plex. We've all been there. Hope is not a strategy. We have clear expectations. They're measurable. Set people up for success. These are your 30, 60, and 90-day goals. We're going to meet every 30 days. I'm going to review whether or not you accomplished those. If you didn't, we're going to talk about what do you need to do to assure that you do in 60. And by 90, we'll know. So it's implement a strategy that is not the hope strategy.
90. That's very, it's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that with it being so short at 9 days.
Well, you really know it. Let's face it.
Yeah.
You get it. You see the things that aren't working.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, thank you so much for spending the time with us and walking us through. It's an incredible story, how you and Ken and the Goettl team, what you've achieved, growing it from 12 million all the way to 2 successful exits to private equity. And the company is still going strong today. So thank you again for sharing your time. We really appreciate it.
Very welcome. It was an opportunity for me to work with Ken and his leadership team.
Yeah.
Love to see that success.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you next time.
Great. Take care, Andrew.